Thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon. My name is Hannah Poole. I'm a journalist and curator of some of the talks and debates here at the Women of the World Festival. So I'm really, really pleased to see you here today. The subject of this panel, FGM, can we end FGM in a generation? As I'm sure you've noticed, there's a huge amount of kind of groundswell of political action and activism that's happening right now on the subject of FGM. And I'm really thrilled by the panel that we've got today, because actually that's a result of a lot of the work that some of these women have been doing. We really do have some phenomenal campaigners here today on stage. So I'm just really excited that we're going to be able to have this conversation with these women. We're going to show a couple of short films, and then I'm going to introduce the panel slightly more formally. So first we'll just show the films.
Female genital mutilation, or FGM, is when a girl's genitals are either partially or totally removed for non-medical reasons. Sometimes called female circumcision, FGM is an ancient practice thought to date back around 2,500 years. Over 140 million women and girls have undergone FGM worldwide. It's practiced in 28 countries in Western, Eastern, and Northeastern Africa, and in parts of Asia and the Middle East. Due to migration, FGM is now being practiced in the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and the UK.
It happens in London, it happens in Sheffield, it happens in Birmingham. It happens literally everywhere. They gather girls together. So they would say, we have 2 girls need cut, or 3 or 4 or 5 girls that need cut, and now they pay the cutters to come into the UK and perform it here.
I remember waking up really early in the morning, and I remember the sun beaming through our bedroom window.
I thought it was like baptism. I thought they're gonna wash me with all this traditional medicine.
It's something we've been getting ready from very young age. They put a big table on the patio, and there was lots of people watching.
She took out the razor blade, and I started to panic straight away. I started to scream.
The next thing I was lying on the floor, and there's this huge woman, very big. She sat on my chest. I didn't stop crying.
I felt every single cut, pull, stitching. I felt it. I felt the whole thing.
I had the most pain. I can't explain it. It felt like I was burning.
Oh, it's indescribable.
I was screaming so much, I just blacked out.
Okay, so I'm now going to introduce our panel. On the far end, we have Government Minister Lynne Featherstone, who shortly is going to be outlining some new government strategy regarding FGM. Next to the Minister, we have Nimco Ali, co-founder of anti-FGM campaigning group Daughters of Eve. Immediately on my right, we have, Naana Otoo-Oyortey from Forward. Then we have Rosamund Urwin, who's a journalist with the London Evening Standard, and we have Effua Dorkenoo from the campaigning group Equality Now. The panellists will be saying a few words to put themselves in context shortly, but first I'd like to invite the Minister, Lynne Featherstone, up to the lectern.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I am delighted to be here, although every time I see a film, it kind of makes me so somber to think that is what people have had to suffer. But I am absolutely delighted to be here, happy to be here at WOW, because WOW, so much is now happening with the movement, started really by the ladies you see on stage in terms of tackling FGM. Now, when I became a minister, I was given some really great advice. they said to me, you'll be inundated with work, a great tsunami of government business will come across you, and you'll do your churn, you'll do your paperwork, you'll go to your meetings, you'll take votes in Parliament, and you'll exit office like a good little minister. But you will have done nothing you set out. When you become a politician, you want to change the world. So unless you ruthlessly prioritise and use the position you are given in office to do, use it to do something transformative. And so when I came into the Department for International Development as a minister in 2012, I was inundated with a tsunami of work, and also a number of priorities, poverty reduction, climate change, education, malaria, family planning, water, sanitation, humanitarian work, transparency and accountability, all of which are phenomenally important and make up the daily work that we do in my department, a department that I'm incredibly proud of. However, I've always been known to tackle issues that others find difficult or sensitive. Just look at the law on same-sex marriage that I instigated and championed when I was Minister at the Home Office. So when I walked into DFID, I decided that ending female genital mutilation would be my priority. I was already aware of it from my time at the Home Office, but I was so shocked when I came to DFID to see the lack of attention it had got, given that 125 million women in Africa alone have suffered the consequences of FGM, and 3 million girls a year are at risk of having their genitals cut off. Surely this has to be a priority for a department like mine, but it wasn't a priority. It was kind of too sensitive, too taboo, put in the difficult box. And it baffled me why the international development community more broadly was so blind to an issue which must be considered one of the most extreme manifestations of discrimination against women and girls, an issue that is violence against women and girls and a violation of human rights, let alone the physical and psychological damage. And just to put this out there at the beginning, every time in the last year or so that I've been talking or writing about FGM, I get a slew of emails from men saying, what about male circumcision? And I have to say there is, as everyone in this room probably knows, absolutely no comparison. And I always do say that if we were, the comparison is cutting off men's penises. And if that was what was happening, this is a practice that would not have lasted 4 minutes, let alone 4,000 years. Well, it's true. And I have to say it's a practice which I regard as completely totemic of the whole violence against women agenda, in the sense that it is oppression and suppression of women. I mean, in its most raw and absolute form. And it has carried on for thousands of years, but the shock is that it carries on still today. So I began my quest to end FGM, a mission that fits well as I am the ministerial champion for tackling violence against women and girls overseas. And it wasn't long before I met some amazing women. They're all here today. I have to say these are the most truly amazing women, campaigners and activists. And many of you out there in the room will be activists and campaigners yourself. And then I met African leaders and women who believed that change could happen. And as I was told by African women and African leaders, they wanted support. And so it was only a matter of months after I started my ministerial post at DFID that African leaders took to the UN General Assembly a resolution that FGM should be banned worldwide. And this resolution was unanimously supported. So then I set off to say, how can we back this resolution? How can we support this movement? And behind me, you will have been watching, I hope I haven't turned round, but I hope you have been watching, a wonderful slideshow of pictures of the many women, men and children that I have met on this journey. And if I had a few hours with you, I could share stories of really the amazing people I've met who are actually driving change to happen in Africa. So if I could pick a few, I'd tell you of an imam and a village chief in Senegal who told me how they have dedicated themselves to building a consensus for ending FGM in their community. And it's a vital intervention because so many link this harmful traditional practice with some kind of religious obligation. And also, as everyone will know, the chiefs are absolutely paramount in this work. In Kenya, I met a woman. I've met many women who were previously cutters. This woman explained to me why she had downed her tools and instead become a birth attendant. She said, I wanted to save lives and not put them at risk. And in Sierra Leone, and I have to say Sierra Leone is a very hardline country on FGM with secret societies, but there I met with academics who told me that there are now, because of everything that's happening in Africa and beyond, opportunities that are opening up to address the practice in the country. And I stood there and I made a speech about FGM, which a few years ago would not have been possible. And in Burkina Faso, I met the charismatic First Lady, who I have to say is a force of nature and is changing that country, where legislation is enforced. So I'm incredibly proud that the coalitionist government has been responsible for the largest ever donor contribution towards ending FGM. It started with a flagship £35 million programme that I announced at last year's Commission on the Status of Women conference in New York. That was just the beginning. We've now committed additional funds in Sudan, and other countries are planning further work. We work at the community level, working with people like Rianata, a local mayor and peer educator in Burkina Faso. They work talking to them, they talk to the villages and the people about why girls are cut, the consequences on health, children's right and the law. Community meetings, peer education, laws banning FGM together have helped reduce the prevalence. It's dropped in young women by 31% in Burkina Faso. We work with politicians and legislators to ensure that laws are in place. Laws being in place is not enough. We're working with academics so that we have the very best evidence to ensure what does work, and we have the evidence that change is happening. And just this week, our new research programme on FGM went out to tender. This research will build a body of evidence on three themes. The first is building the picture of where, why, and when FGM is practiced, focusing on the drivers, causes, and impacts of FGM. The main body of research will look at what interventions are most effective to end FGM and in what context. Because what I have found, and I'm sure what others have found, is everywhere is different. People have different reasons for change, different practices. So we have to know what will have the right effect, the right impact, and where. And the final theme is going to focus on the wider impacts of FGM for girls, their families, and their communities. Which means getting more evidence on when and how interventions focused on FGM can bring about a wider shift in how communities value their girls and women, because it all comes back to women's position in the world, our low status and our lack of power, whether it's financial, political. It is the very basis of all that happens to women. And of course, last month on the International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGM, we announced an amazing team to lead a global campaign to drive change. And anyone who knows anything about female genital mutilation in the United Kingdom will already know Efua, Nimco, Naana and Layla. And I am delighted that they are going to lead our work on FGM. And it is wonderful that change is happening here in the UK. The Health Service is now going to be collecting data to help us target FGM and safeguarding work. Earlier this year, I met with the Department of Education and representatives of the teacher unions to discuss how we can all work together to ensure that teachers have the necessary tools to keep girls safe. With new statutory guidance coming out from the Department of Education, schools and teachers will now be informed and have those tools. The legal system is being strengthened, so girls are protected from being cut, and anyone who violates this will be prosecuted. Prosecutions, of course, endlessly frustrating. There hasn't been any, but right now, with all of the work that is going on and talking to the Director of Public Prosecutions, Alison Saunders, she says there are 10 cases that they are looking at in London alone and is very optimistic that there will be a prosecution. We need prosecutions to send out a message. That's what's worked in Burkina Faso. But ultimately we need behaviour change, because the answer won't be putting 24,000 sets of parents in prison. It will be about people abandoning it because it's no longer part of their lives. So government action alone is not going to end FGM. In January this year, I met in the UK with faith leaders from across the United Kingdom to discuss what more we can do to end the practice and dispel the myth that it is a requirement of any religion. And Norman Baker, who's my Liberal Democrat colleague, Minister in the Home Office, and myself are going to take that work forward to develop a compact with religious leaders And many people over the past months have congratulated me on this work. They don't need to congratulate me, they need to congratulate these women. But actually, it's far too early for any sorts of congratulations. It's fantastic to have got to this level of awareness raising. We've broken the silence that once shrouded this issue. And I'm absolutely delighted that all of our work together on FGM and on violence against women and girls has led today to the announcement by my department that the Prime Minister will host a major event in July to tackle female genital mutilation and early and forced marriage, both domestically and internationally. And as I was at number 10 on, I think it was Thursday night, and it was fantastic. You had Theresa May talking about FGM, you had the Prime Minister talking about FGM. So this really, all I can say is thank you to these women. And I'm here today to see we all have to be champions of change. If you look at what Farmer, who's led the Guardian's recent FGM campaign, and the wonderful girls in Bristol have done, they've changed government policy before they've even finished school. In fact, Farmer took me around Bristol last October. I can say I knew her before she was famous. And she showed me the inspiring things that young people to do. And lastly, just before I finish up, I do want to say thank you to the media. I mean, we have the Evening Standard and the Guardian here today, who are both phenomenally supportive and have led the campaigns. The Evening Standard has been amazing, but so have the Times and the Sunday Times. And it's one of those rare occasions, because politicians and media are not always best friends, but on this, we're all working together. So thank you to everyone. With the incredible energy of everyone at this Women of the World Festival, we actually can do this. Join this amazing campaign that will see an end to female genital mutilation in one generation. It is totally possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lynne. That's a really great overview of where we are right now. Nimco, would you like to say a few words about how you got into this campaign and what you're doing?
Okay. Thank you, first of all, Hannah, for actually inviting me 3.5 years ago after seeing my Myths of My Mouth poster and us comparing hair to come talk about FGM. That happened on a Sunday at a Wild Bite.
Yep, Wild Bite.
Okay, so it was 50 minutes long. It was a Sunday morning, so I was committed then. And there was 4 people there. Few people tipsy on the panel with me as well, so it was like, you know, the conversation has carried on since then, and that's due to the commitment from both Hannah and Jude Kelly, who I'm very grateful for that as well. In terms of how I kind of got involved in the conversation, it was in 2006 when I went to a local, the academy, which Lynne visited in October, and Fauma is actually a testament to the girls that came before her. So we allowed the first ones to speak in a safe place, and then now they can meet the UN General Secretary, and we can kind of be sitting with royalty talking about FGM. So in 2006, I was there to talk about how do you get into a red brick university, nothing to do with vaginas, I promise you. And as soon as the teacher left the room, there was 13 girls that were in that room, and they asked me about FGM, and I was very flippant, and I said, what do you know about FGM? Having had FGM myself and assuming that by 2006 it would have stopped. And I disengaged, thinking like, you know, I'd empowered myself, I'd become a feminist, everybody must be doing the same thing. And I asked those girls, like, you know, how many of you have had FGM? And that's one of the things that I immensely feel bad about saying, and it's one of the reasons why I work 24/7 in order to right that wrong. And out of the 13 girls, 12 of them had undergone FGM. And in that moment, I knew that my silence was complicit to the misunderstanding of FGM. But knowing what other survivors and other activists had gone through in talking about their experience, I never actually talked about my experience until 2010. And then 2012, the Evening Standard thankfully gave myself the opportunity to talk about FGM, all set up by another leading activist, Brendan. So men can join this campaign as well. And it was really interesting because I just thought the Evening Standard doesn't go online. This is going to be a small story and that's it. But things came around from that. And the conversation carried on, and I was constantly always speaking about FGM, and then also around that time my niece was born. So essentially the conversation around ending FGM in a generation can happen because we've broken the cycle in that generation, but it's about leveraging that communication to kind of do it on on a bigger scale. And I will say that when you've made FGM palatable is when the Prime Minister invites you to talk about FGM, and the female cat, Lucy, is in the corner, like, you know, grooming itself. You're thinking, okay, talking about vaginas, there's a pussy cat there. It's like, it's Monty Python at its best. But, and then you've got Camilla Parker Bowles that's very interested in FGM. So I think we've got the momentum going, but it's now actually how do we leverage that to use the privileges that we have in this room to ensure that women in the developing countries and around the world actually have the support and actually know that we are supporting them. So that's basically how I've been involved in the FGM stuff.
Thank you very much, Nimco. Naana.
Thank you very much. It's really a privilege to be able to talk about the things that I feel very passionate about. I think in terms of how I came across this work, I attended the first conference on violence against women in Brighton, where there were so many women, about 2,000 women were there. And I attended one of the panel discussions where a woman spoke passionately about her experience of female genital mutilation. And I just asked myself that I've been working in the area of violence against women and felt that this was an area that it could have been me. And I just asked myself, maybe I could have been born in one of those countries. Could I have influenced my mother to have stopped? So I realized that it was very important to be part of this campaign, but it also was very important to look at the gatekeepers and those who really make change happen. And that really made me feel that it's important to be a change agent, but also to enable others who have the capacity to make change happen to work with them. Having joined Forward, and I think that was the time that Efua had left to the World Health Organization, and she called me to come on board to support Forward. So I came on board Forward as a volunteer, then joined the board, and since then the board has continued to roll. I felt very passionate about working on African women's health, primarily because I felt that there were so many other issues, and it's amazing that the Prime Minister is now taking the issues. 12 years ago, we started talking about child marriage. Nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody thought it was important. Now, today, the Prime Minister is talking about child marriage, talking about FGM. So it was a time when I felt that it really was important to really get the opportunity to work at an organization where I could really do the things that I felt I needed to do. Because in most organizations, you always have caps as to what you could do and what you couldn't do. So being Forward really was an opportunity to say, you know what, we can do it. And as women, as African women, as diaspora African women, we really have a voice. So I came strongly as a diaspora African woman who can contribute to change. And as a result of that, I strongly believe in the role of diaspora women in leading this program of change. So enabling women to have the capacity to have the voice has been what has been very important to me. I've really been fed up with a lot of, I would say, FGM tourism, where people go and do ad hoc meeting events here, and that's the end. And I felt that it was very important to really work with women on a long-term basis, because change doesn't happen just overnight. Change happens when people ponder over issues, reflect, engage with others. And as a result of that, we started working on a number of initiatives in Forward, which included the Women's Health and Leadership Program. We started this program in Bristol. Now, Bristol women have become one of the models of good practice. It was interesting when the women in Bristol decided to march in the streets against FGM. And one of the advocates came and told me that her husband said, how dare you go and speak about your bits to the television? And that made her worried. But by continuing the leadership program, she felt that she needed to have a voice. The other issue what I felt was really important was the role of diaspora women themselves in leading change. I came across a woman who just finished her PhD. She said, Naana, I finished my PhD. I really have found this issue of child marriage. What do I do? I said, what do you want to do about it? And she said, maybe I'm going to go back home. I said, when you go back home and you start something, call me. So she went home, and after that, she said, Naana, I've set up a small organization. We don't have any funding. I said, luckily, we've got some funders who are very, very generous and can give you the opportunity to grow. Very often, funders don't give you that opportunity. Very set programs, 2 years, 1 year, you cannot do much with it. So you do need that kind of enabling environment. So I was able to say that, you know what, we can give you 10,000 to start the program. She did a conference, and today she has set up this organization that everybody wants to work with. So it's really important that we work with people collectively and we can make a change.
That's great. Thank you very much, Naana. Okay, Rosamund.
Hi, I'm Rosamund from the London Evening Standard. I suppose I'm probably the office's resident angry feminist, which our paper has been covering the issue of FGM extensively in the last 12 months, and I'm very proud of the part the paper has played in raising awareness, particularly as this is an issue that affects communities and young girls a lot in London. I can remember the first time I heard about FGM, and I was actually 17, so that was 12 years ago, and a friend of mine was raising money, and I didn't know what it was. I went away and Googled it, and obviously I was absolutely horrified this was still happening. But what has struck me in the years that followed was how little I actually then heard about it. And I sort of thought, well, why is this not in the press? Why are we not writing about this every day? And I have been really, really proud over the last year that the Standard has written extensively, as with The Guardian and the Sunday Times and the Times, to raise awareness of something that really the media should probably have shone a spotlight on a very long time ago. And I feel as though, I think the reaction you tended to get was, oh, we've got to be culturally sensitive. And a lot of people were under the mistaken assumption that it was a religious practice, but actually it is practiced in far beyond the Islamic community. It's also practiced by Christians and amongst a very small Jewish community as well. But, and I think so people sort of shied away from talking about it. It was one of those many things sort of brushed under the carpet. And I think what's made me terribly proud over the last year is that we've really seen a voice and a movement and getting women who have experienced it particularly to come forward, and that's been most of my part of that has been interviewing women who are either campaigning against it or who have suffered it and are now campaigning. One of the very first things I did, and it was exactly a year ago today, I was just realising, I interviewed for International Women's Day an amazing woman called Comfort Momo, who does not come from a community where they practice FGM, but she has a clinic at St Thomas's Hospital for victims of FGM. And one of the things that struck me most profoundly talking to her was, and she does just incredible work and has been sort of battering at this door for years and years and years, and now finally, you know, I saw she was on the BBC recently, and it was this great thing of thinking, yes, finally we're hearing this woman's voice, because this is what we should have been talking about so long ago. One of the things that really struck me that she talked about was that we tend to think of this as an issue just for young girls, but she sort of from both angles, both that FGM is now happening at a younger age because girls here, so it would traditionally be 5 to 12, but she said she thought it was probably happening even to babies now because as girls become westernized, they might be able to sort of, they might sort of be able to say, look, I don't want this happening to me, to the parents, and might protest. So parents are protesting younger, but also that she'd had a woman who was 40 who had, her mother-in-law had made her undergo FGM because she hadn't been able to get pregnant. And it was just the sort of extent of it. I mean, the sort of all these horror stories. She had so many horror stories. And I'm really glad that the Standard has played a big part in raising awareness. And I'm really just very happy this conversation is being had, I suppose.
Okay. That's great. Thank you very much. Efua.
Well, I first want to thank the Southbank and the women of the world and everybody who is here. I'm Efua. I'm sometimes referred to as the mother of the campaign because I've been with this campaign for over 30 years. And I'm amongst one of the women who stood up in the world and tried to build bridges, raising the issue on the ground level to national and international level. But what I would say, I personally came into it from a clinical angle. Like Comfort, I was basically in training, and I had to deal with a woman who had the most extensive FGM and was totally closed. And this was in the 70s. Maybe a lot of you were not born then. And the cries of that woman being given birth and her life, this life-saving channel for humans blocked, and her screaming, and professionals around not knowing anything about it really touched me. And the issue had followed me up to today. Basically, I come from Ghana, and in northern Ghana, about 1.6 million women are affected. They practice clitoridectomy. And I just want to say that the core of this practice is really to reduce women's sexual pleasure. That's the core, although several justifications are given. And the key issue is removing the clitoris, which is central to women's sexuality and women's sexual pleasure. So for me, first and foremost, FGM is a gross violation of the rights of the child and women. And the reason that it continues is quite complex. It's mainly because women feel, people who do it feel they have to do it in order to have social acceptance. And there's, unlike any other forms of practices, there's pressure on females in FGM practicing communities to submit to FGM. I think the campaign has gone through 3 phases, and we are in the 3rd phase. And I think there's a window of opportunity now that we are sitting here talking about it, because when I started work in this area, we couldn't even have a normal conversation. The whole thing was so controversial, with a lot of everybody pointing hands, either north, south, isms, and we forget about the suffering of girls and women who are affected. We are, in the first phase was during the 80s, where we made a lot of effort to put FGM on the agenda, on the United Nations agenda in particular, as FGM as both a public health and a human rights violation, and to try to push it onto different agendas, including the various UN specialized agencies. From the 90s, women's groups started working with this issue, and by the mid-90s, the United Nations, particularly UNICEF and UNSPA, had taken it in a big way. I myself went to work with the WHO in 1994 and helped them to put FGM, define the definition, the classification, and get it onto the World Health Assembly, which then introduced it to countries. So we are moving into a 3rd stage where I think in Britain what has happened is really excellent in the sense that a lot of systematic work which has been done has got to a stage where the voices of the young generation has really helped us put it beyond our understanding in terms of the strategic way that the government has embraced this. And I would, on this note, say a big thank you, Lynne, and to the UK government for taking FGM to this level. I think what has happened in the UK, it's almost like multiple level of actions which has now got to a stage of national consciousness about FGM. And that's what we want to happen in all the countries. I would say that at least in 28 countries in Africa. There's a whole lot of body of work which has been done. And at the moment, I've just taken up the post of to lead the End FGMC campaign, which is one component of the UK initiative, the biggest initiative ever in terms of resource and attached to work on FGM, so that we could galvanize this campaign is to galvanize a world movement. So for the first time, we are going to have an identity, a logo, a brand. You know, when I do talk about child rights, child marriages, for example, it has a strapline called Child Not Brides. We want all of you to go and think, if we were to have a strapline, what kind of strapline should we have for FGM? So I've just started to lead the program. We are just in the inception phase. It's which would end in July. We'll be doing the identity for the campaign, and we've just started scoping exercises in countries. I've just returned from Kenya, and we've also done one for Somalia and Senegal, and the next 6 weeks we are going to other countries. So what I am trying to say is we are starting from the point of view that we've reached a stage, and there's a lot of work which has been done, and the British government is coming in a big way to help to support this work as we take it forward. And we would like to invite everybody to join us in this campaign. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, I mean, you know, Efua, you have been part of this, the very heart of this for so long. It's incredible that you're here to speak to us today. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you, you're talking there about having been part of it and the phases and being in this different phase. Do you have a concern that we're at this particular phase, but we could just reach a certain level? What has to happen for change for it to go beyond that to the next phase? Because presumably you don't want to be here having this conversation in another 10 years' time.
Okay, so I think what has happened now is we moved FGM from the margins as something which black women get on and they do deal with it, to bring it for the UK right to center of policy of safeguarding children, provision of services for affected women. And right now, we have in the UK about 16 specialist clinics within the NHS. I first actually worked when I was working under Forward to set the first one at Northwick Park Hospital, and the Department of Health helped us to set this clinic. And it spread, there are about 16 or 17 of them. We want, this thing is multi-layered, and we have to address it within a broader framework of violence against women. There is the prevention aspect, which is core to the work that we do, and various people are working on it from different angles. But we need to also build into it for the UK in terms of protection, because it's a safeguarding issue in order for us to address that. And then provision of the services, and then prosecutions. And I know that people tend to want to jump first to the prosecutions, but it's really the last line. And what we want to do is to protect the girl child before the mutilation happens, because it's irreversible. And so this country, I think we're moving in the right direction. And when you say, how would it be, in so long as it's embedded within the social healthcare and the justice system, we can't be sure that it will be, the work will be sustainable and it can move on. And I think that's the place that we want all the countries to get to. Burkina Faso is almost it's got a framework of a system going. Kenya is moving very, very rapidly. And when we did the scoping exercise, you could see all the different levels from the grassroots to the top level. But what it needs is somebody helping to join the dots. And as Lynne said, each country is different. So we have to assess the context of each country's, the availability of structures to deal with it. But personally, I think that the prime responsibility of addressing the issue is governments, and we need to be holding all the duty bearers to account. Thank you.
Lynne, the issue of governments and prosecution, you mentioned prosecutions. Everyone is very kind of, it's almost, there's a strange thing happening now where people are sort of desperate for that first prosecution. Do you think that's the most important thing right now?
I think it's very important because it is illegal in this. It is illegal in this country and has been for a long time. And when a prosecution doesn't happen, you say, well, the government doesn't really care. The law is an ass on this. So I think it is incredibly important that we get prosecutions. So, but the bigger question is behaviour change. And interestingly enough, I was in, where was I? Burkina Faso. And I met with the judiciary there because I was having this conversation with them saying, well, I'd met a cutter who had been in jail for a year, and they've had about 179 or thereabout prosecutions in Burkina. And I said to the justice, the judge, how do you dispense justice? And he said, well, for cutters I give 1, 2 or 3 years, but for parents I give suspended 3 months. So I think, I don't know. Let us get to the point of prosecution and then trust in the judiciary to use the circumstances as to what they do with that in terms of the punitive side. My bigger interest is in behaviour change and how you move forward so that future generations don't suffer what past generations have suffered.
Naana, when you were speaking earlier on, you made a really sort of key remark, I think, about FGM tourism, almost, about this idea of kind of bandwagoning, and suddenly everyone's very excited about it, and then they give some money, and they do a project for a year, and then they leave. How do you think we can get beyond that in terms of policy internationally?
I think we shouldn't just look internationally, we should even look at the UK. And it would be very important to even look how much money has been allocated to community work in the UK. And you'll find that similarly, where money is just dished out in small bites, you can't plan strategically. So you'll find that even when you have to recruit staff, stop and start, it doesn't bring continuity in a program. So it's really important that we give long-term funding. And I'm really pleased that even with this DFID money, you're seeing that it's a 5-year program. You rarely see 5-year programs.
And what are the programs for?
You'll find that a lot of the programs really target different levels. And what we're seeing is looking at the need to work at the community level, looking at the need to work at policy level. What I have seen in the parts of the countries that we work in, particularly in Tanzania, the policy is in place. But at the same time, you have a situation where traditional norms supersede legal laws. And when that happens, you'll find that nobody is penalized. And where people are even penalized is very minimal. So it gives the impression that we're having 2 parallel systems. Having to work with traditional leaders is very central because we see in some of the communities, they provide the bylaws that actually enable FGM to continue. And working at the community level, but working with young people, and I think in Africa, there isn't much work happening with young people, particularly because there's very little young women-led organizations. Most of the organizations are older women's organizations who tend not to nurture young women. So I think we do need that shift to really work with young women. You're seeing in the UK the role of young women in making change happen. And I think we do not have a lot of that in Africa. So how do we nurture that and create that enabling environment? Young women's organizations don't have bank accounts, don't have all the necessary things for funders to give them money. So we really need to look critically, particularly when we are mapping out what is happening on the ground. I see that happening often. And when you nurture the young women, you do see the change also happening. So I think that's one of the things that we really need to. But also playing a role with UK young women to sometimes play a role in working with their countries of origin. We haven't seen that happening a lot. Maybe that's an opportunity to also put that into place.
So Nimco, as resident young woman and diaspora and incredibly vibrant campaigner on this, could you tell the audience about the FDL?
I was going to say that you don't need a bank account to fight FGM, just join #FDL. And FDL, so it started off as a parody of the EDL, saying who can speak for the English people, and I thought we can speak for vaginas though, so we can be FDL, and that's the Funny Defence League, and if you're under 18, it's the Female Defence League. So essentially, if we're talking, I think one of the questions that you asked in terms of how can we make sure that we're not here in 10 years' time having this conversation, is essentially the conversation that we started was to unite women together. So 3 years ago when we did the Muff March, it was kind of like, how dare you put FGM alongside domestic abuse, violence, rape and so on. And for me as a feminist, it was like, it doesn't matter what form of gender-based violence you're facing, if you look up, it's patriarchy, that's all oppressing us. And it's like, it's creating a sisterhood and a collaboration to say that, again, one of the things that Naana said is that by the look of sliding doors, I could be that girl that's in sub-Saharan Africa that hasn't got access to education and so on, but in the West, I can, another hashtag, check my privilege, and say, I can actually talk about this. So essentially, I think what we've done is we've created women understanding that FGM doesn't happen because of race, it doesn't happen because of your religion or everything else, it happens because of your gender. And that's the only reason why I was subjected to FGM, is the fact that because, and I really loved when I was coming through here, there was a whole wall saying fearless. And in terms of FGM not happening to girls, those girls are fearless and able to reach their full potential. And this is what's great about this social communication component that's been funded by DFID. And thank you very much, Lynne, as one of the founding members of the FDL. She has been very committed to this. And I remember when we first met in the Home Office, it was a very angry Nimco that was trying to say, actually, we need to be taking this responsible, you need to be taking responsibility for this, and you have, and I can, well done for that.
Well, look at the effect you had on me.
I know. we were having that kind of conversation, and even and then it was the young people. So there is a momentum of change, and it is the ripple effect, and we are at this wave, and it's we talk about different waves of feminism, and this wave of feminism has got us all united together as women. Mm-hmm. So essentially, I don't necessarily think that you need bank accounts. I don't necessarily think that you need to be organising in order to make change. It's about supporting existing frameworks that are happening and using the leverage that we have as individuals to actually make that change.
What about the inevitable backlash, really, both from within the communities and then from without as well? So the idea, firstly, that FGM is something that shouldn't be talked about, which comes, I think, from both. From all communities sometimes, and also the idea that by talking about it, you're exposing something, that you're giving people fuel. So, for example, I know that I've seen FGM used as a reason to be against immigration, for example.
And you will always have the Daily Mail test in terms of those things. It's but the whole thing is, for me, especially this links into the conversation about prosecutions. And there was a senior politician that was here yesterday and was just vehemently going on about prosecutions. And I said to her, if you want a prosecution, prosecutions are not about preventing FGM. It's ultimately about seeking justice for that individual. And if you're going to prosecute, it's about actually saying, we care about enough the fact that we failed you, then we're going to give you remedies through the judicial system. And as a failed lawyer, I believe in that. But ultimately, if we're going to get a prosecution from the 2003 legislation, which made FGM illegal to be taken out of the country as a UK citizen or national, we have to be supporting those girls that could come forward. So there's a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old that has been failed already, and we need to be providing safety and protection for her to come forward. But sometimes when politicians talk about prosecutions, they really want that, that smoking gun. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying, you really want to walk into a room where a child's being cut. Ultimately, I don't want to see that, I don't want that to happen. So the great work that Efua's been doing in terms of working with the NHS and so on. So backlash happens, and ultimately there's some of us that are more privileged to talk about FGM than others that can't, because they know that that their lives are at risk. Mm-hmm. So the Evening Standard, the first article that was done, and Brendan talked me into it, and I always tell this funny story where I say I didn't know the Evening Standard was online. Mm-hmm. I know that now. And I also didn't know that if you spelled your name wrongly, it still links you to your Google search. And also that wearing a hat doesn't disguise you very well. So ultimately, so I did this, like, took a picture, talked about my experience. There was 3 lines that was actually attributed to me, and that, like, leveraged so much hate and anger, and people wanted to kill me, like, people actually attempted to kill me and all these things, without, like, I'm unable to go home to Bristol now, which is a city that I love because there's so many idiots around. But ultimately, I'm lucky. I'm immensely privileged that I can go home to Putney. These girls are living within these communities where, if they're speaking about their FGM, if they're going for a defibrillation to these clinics that Effua helped set up, their lives could be at risk. So we have to kind of think about that. We keep looking for prosecutions, but these prosecutions are going to come when we provide protection for these young girls.
Rosamund, as you said, the Standard has been doing some great work on this campaign. I'd be really interested to know, have you faced resistance within the office, perhaps when you started writing about it, and how are things different now?
So one of the things for us is I think it really helps that we've had a female editor to cover this campaign. I think that's made it an easier thing to get through, to be honest. One of the things that I've noticed, not so much in the office, I think there's been a really good movement behind it, but you do get a lot of people going, on Twitter or whatever, in the way that they do, why are you banging on about this issue so much? And you think, well, because it's happening and because it's dreadful. And I mean, there is a problem, I suppose, of fatigue around any bad thing. So Syria or any sort of horrific things that are happening in the world, they fall down the news agenda because, on a news desk they're going to say, well, they've had a lot of this, they've had a lot of children who, have lost their, or whatever it is. And your kind of duty as a journalist is to try to keep it at the top and say, well, actually, this is a new way that we can do it, or this is whatever, and keep it moving. Because I think otherwise you do face that sort of backlash, or just the simple, more broad fatigue, which is just people thinking, oh, it's this again that they're banging on about. I think the office, there's been a very concerted sort of move behind it, which is really, really positive. But yeah, it is more, and Lynne touched on the thing that I think feminist journalists will recognise across everything, which is that you said, you get men going, well, what about male circumcision? Yeah. And you get this on all issues about feminism. You get men going, but what about this, about us? And the funniest one of those I saw recently was on The Guardian, where they were talking about pregnancy and women in the workplace, and men had written, and what about the men? And it was like the one time you really had no ability to do that. But it does happen on everything. And I think female genital mutilation is a very extreme example of that, where I got so much when I started writing. I think it was probably the Comfort Momo interview, where it was just, but you've got to touch on circumcision. I just got so much coming into my inbox saying, look at men, look what's happening to men. And there might be a very strong case against that, but frankly, this is the issue we are talking about here.
And of course, there's nothing stopping someone setting up a campaign.
Exactly, that's what's so frustrating. You think, if you're really angry about this, you go away and set up the amazing things that women are doing against FGM, but have your own thing. It doesn't, when we're covering one issue, we don't have to cover everything that's in any way related to it. But yeah.
That's great, thank you very much. Okay, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but thank you very much for listening and for your great questions. And please say a huge thank you to this amazing panel of activists.